specialists with the Arizona Department of Education. Every day we spread the message that math is fun, math is for everyone, and that we can help you get your students to really believe that.
Especially your students that don't think they have a math brain. We talk a lot about universal design for learning because it is the framework that encompasses all good teaching practices.
The three main principles of UDL are easy to remember if you've spent any time in a classroom.
And we would know we spent years in classrooms, pre-K through post-secondary.
Bottom line, you can't learn if you're not engaged, and the same activities and experiences are just not going to engage all of your students. The first goal for any teacher in terms of engagement is to recruit their students' interest, to find some way to get them to pay attention, to get excited even about what they're doing in the classroom. And teachers have come up with all sorts of innovative activities and strategies to recruit their students' interest. Things like doing everything they can to connect the mathematics to the real world around them. In preschool and kindergarten, for example, instead of just pulling your students and asking them to prove to you that they can count 10 objects accurately, why not set up a play center that models something they see in the real world every day? For example, set up a McDonald's play center. Tell them that they have to interview in order to work at McDonald's, and they have to prove that they can count out 10 plastic pennies to sell 10 yellow sponge fries. And when they prove that to you, give them that visor. Tell them they're hired. Give them a certificate even. And have them be in charge at the play center. Put scaffolds there so that other students who are still learning can have something to help them out, and let those students help them out. And have the other students go to McDonald's and buy some fries. Sometimes recruiting interest is as simple as putting things your students like into the problem. So if you have a first grader that loves Pokemon, make those word problems about Pokemon. 3 Pokemon went to the park and found 8 more Pokemon already playing. How many Pokemon were in the park? Or in high school, let your students choose what they want to present about in mathematics. Their presentations may be on topics as diverse as comparing video game sales to calculating how much pizza it would take to crush a human being. Or send your students on an equivalence egg hunt. If you want them to recognize equivalent representations or practice the order of operations and recognize when equations have equivalent solutions, why not cut up that traditional worksheet and stuff those problems into plastic eggs? Put your students on teams so they can work together. Let them hunt for eggs, which they love to do, and then have them open the eggs and match the equivalent expressions and representations, solve the different equations, and pair the equations with like solutions. It's just so much more engaging than having them do those same problems at their desks with pencil and paper. Really, there are countless examples out there to help you recruit the interest of your students. We encourage you to be creative, get to know your students. Remember, you teach students, you don't teach math. You teach students math. It's not always possible, but whenever it is, connect the mathematics to something that they actually enjoy. It's more engaging. In worst case scenario, if you have a ton of problems for them to get through, and normally you would be inclined to put them together in a packet for them to work on individually in traditional rows, why not chunk those problems? Put them at different stations. Allow your students to make some choices at those stations. Provide scaffolds and tools to help them work on those problems. And then actually ask your students to physically get up and move every so many minutes to the next station to build in that essential physical brain break that will send oxygen to their brains and keep them from becoming fatigued. Anything you can do, be creative. The ultimate goal in terms of student engagement is not just that teachers can recruit their interest, but that they can sustain their interest, that students begin to engage themselves, to become what we call self-regulating learners, learners who want to learn, know how to self-assess, and monitor their own progress. And if that is the goal, then teachers need to help their students focus on productive mindsets. You can put new information in here that's not hard for you, but if there's no struggle, if there's no considering something new, your brain's not changing. And if your brain's not changing, I think that's a waste of your time in school. So, what 2 things are thinking about? Speed? And right answers. What are we thinking about? What is the goal?
Learning.
Learning is the goal.
Growing your brain.
Making connections. And do we care only about how we think about the math? No, what other people think. The more ways you understand, the smarter you are. One of the most important lessons, and it's not one lesson, it's modeling, it's multiple lessons, but one of the most important lessons a teacher can teach, particularly in mathematics, is the importance of mistakes and struggles, productive struggle.
My group almost killed me on the first activity.
All right, so we're frustrated, right? But you know what's good about that?
Nothing.
No, there's lots of good things about frustration. So, since I want you to grow your brains and build connections, I give you problems that are a little bit frustrating. But I have every confidence in you that you're going to make meaningful progress. So, why don't you try drawing a picture that helped the last? And they shared the rest, which was 12. Does that work?
Is 40.
But here's why I'm super excited about this. You made a mistake, right? What do we know about mistakes? The second you make a mistake, your brain has, this is like the best opportunity ever. This is when your brain grows, right? You made some sort of a mistake. Your brain says, uh-oh, I made a mistake. I better rethink this, or I better what. And the next time you solve a problem like this, your brain is going to be better capable. So don't give up. Because if you give up, you lose fantastic opportunity, right? When students are able to persist through their struggles and their mistakes in the mathematics classroom, those problems, operations, or standards that cause them anxiety, cause them to feel stuck, often cause avoidance, they can come to a place where they get to know themselves more deeply as learners. They get to know their strengths, those things they are currently doing and understanding well, and they also get to know their stretches, what they're working on, what they must continue to work on if they're going to get to the next level in their understanding, if they're going to make forward progress. And eventually, this knowledge can help them monitor their progress independently, metacognitively. And if students are able to see a growing list of strengths, particularly in an environment where everyone is making note of their strengths and stretches on a regular basis, celebrating mistakes as they're made in the classroom, then even if they have multiple stretches, even if the person next to them knows a little bit more than they do, they'll be far more likely to remain engaged because they'll be able to believe in their capacity to make forward progress because they've seen forward progress. And that really is the ultimate goal of UDL. Not that all students would achieve at a standardized level in standardized ways, but that teaching would be designed from the start in such a way as to inspire constant forward progress for all students.
You never know when something is going to click for a student and all of a sudden they understand, especially in math. And it's almost never the same representation or activity that gets them to that deeper learning, even for the same content.
The culminating goal of providing multiple means of representation in the classroom is greater comprehension for all students. To this end, our most consistent recommendation to teachers at all levels, preschool through post-secondary, is that they focus on and utilize CPA and alternate algorithms and solution paths to teach every big idea and concept. The concrete pictorial abstract concept, or CPA, is not a new idea. But whereas we used to teach mathematics almost exclusively using concrete materials in the lowest grades, bridge to pictorial representations throughout elementary, and move almost exclusively to abstract algorithms or procedures in secondary classrooms, what we're finding now is that the more we ask students at all levels, particularly at the highest levels, to go back and forth among these representations, to make connections among these representations, the more students are coming to truly understand big mathematical ideas. Take, for example, a 7th grade classroom where students are learning to use algebra and algebraic expressions to represent the real world around them. They really need to be constantly going back to the concrete, using materials they can touch, like algebra tiles or algebra blocks, for instance, when they're solving those problems. And when they do use a formal method to solve algebraic problems or a formal procedure, they really should be able to demonstrate why that method or procedure works step by step using those same concrete materials. And if they can't quite do that yet, it's worthwhile to use a different procedure that they actually understand. This is true at all levels. Only when students are able to demonstrate their understanding of mathematical ideas using all three representations, concrete manipulatives they can touch, pictures they can draw or select, as well as the more abstract or formal procedures and algorithms or symbolic representations, that they've truly achieved a depth of understanding of that big idea or concept. This is the kind of comprehension that students actually retain long term, the kind that enables them to use math that they're learning inside the classroom, outside of the classroom, which after all is the goal. Now, what is really significant about providing flexibility and variety in terms of all of these representations on a regular basis in terms of cognitive neuroscience is that each accurate representation holds the potential to contribute to the understanding of each other accurate representation. Our brains make connections. That's how we learn. It's always been how we learn. And sometimes simply coming to understand one representation or seeing a new representation enables us to suddenly understand another representation that we previously just could not access. And you never know what it's going to be that's going to trigger that for a student. Now remember, the goal is always forward progress for all students. Of course, it's true that the more representations they understand, the better their comprehension. But the expectation is not that all students will be able to move fluidly among all representations, or that teachers could even hope to show their students all of the representations. The expectation is just that teachers, in regularly providing a flexible variety of interpretations and representations, in routinely and explicitly addressing the connections among those different representations for their students, will be better able to ensure that all of their students can find at least one representation that makes sense, something they can grasp onto, that they can build on in terms of continuing on that journey toward true comprehension. And this is critical for students who have ever gotten stuck trying to learn one specific method or one specific procedure that for whatever reason they couldn't access. Let's teach our kids that there's always more than one procedure. There's always more than one strategy. There's always more than one path available to them to solve meaningful problems.
Every student has a right to demonstrate their learning and their progress. But if we force our students to show us what they know in only one way, we're never going to discover what all of our students truly know and are able to do. And more importantly, neither will they. And a student who doesn't realize that they've made progress is probably going to give up.
In terms of action and expression, let's briefly address the guidelines for expression and communication. As teachers, we should be as flexible as possible when we ask our students to communicate their understanding and their learning to us and to themselves, knowing that anything we can do to help them understand and express what they really know will help them along their journey toward becoming expert learners. One of the easiest ways to do this is to allow our students opportunities to work together in groups on meaningful, open-ended tasks. In other words, place students in groups and give them the freedom to express themselves however they choose, so long as they are all getting a chance to contribute to the learning. And we need to be flexible when we group them. Some tasks, we want them to work together in pairs. Some tasks, 3 or 4 is perfectly appropriate. The point is, students will naturally communicate in ways that make sense to them when we allow them to work together. And when we open up the mathematics, when we ask different questions, deeper questions, open questions, when we provide group-worthy, discovery-oriented tasks or low-floor, high-ceiling tasks, tiered tasks, when we provide these sorts of open tasks, we allow all students, no matter their skill level or disability, to focus on the same content standard or big idea and to build from what they already know. We also provide them the structure and the freedom to express their learning in whatever way they feel most comfortable, in whatever way they can. And in these sorts of open constructs, it's also much easier for students to use whatever tools and assistive technology is necessary and available to them to express their understanding than when working from a textbook or a traditional worksheet. In addition, it's very easy for them to practice and you to assess those all-important math practice standards, in particular, number 3, construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. You can't do that by yourself. Flexible groupings, accessible and tiered tasks, engaging tasks, and of course, assistive technology are imperative for many students struggling or disinterested in the mathematics, whether because they're learning the language of instruction, they have some sort of a disability, or just because the concept hasn't clicked yet. But the truth is, these things are great for all students.
These were just a few examples. There are more in our presentations and more somewhere in your brain.
So, grab some colleagues.
Check out our links.
And let's get creative.
And remember,
We're
smarter together.